Any doubts in what we covered yesterday?
No, no, not thus far.
And we started with the domain 2 in the introduction. We were in the introduction part,
Hmm.
and we understood what definition of risk is. Risk
Yes.
is a probability. It's
Hmm.
a probability, and the constituents in that calculation of probability is threat, vulnerability, likelihood, and mission of the organization assets. That is basically the value to the of that asset. We
Hmm.
will be understanding it in a lot of detail as we progress through this domain.
Hmm.
So, before we progress into this domain, this magic slide number 100, we left it there. So,
Yes.
so now let's go a little in detail and understand these loosely used terms. Like we generally keep using vulnerability, threat. Sometimes we use it loosely. Like threat is called vulnerability and vulnerability threat. And our understanding in general terms is that all is the same. Only a kind of a risk could be threat, it
Hmm.
could be vulnerability. But now
Hmm.
since we are doing this certification and we need to understand the technical differences between these key terms. So,
Hmm.
what do you understand by a vulnerability and a
So, vulnerability are the weaknesses in the system. That is the vulnerability, and the threat is the threat that vulnerability possess. Meaning that if that vulnerability is exploited or that weakness is exploited, then this much data can be taken out, or we can have a data breach. So that's how can I relate to that?
all right? So fair enough. That is how it is. Can you see the slide on the screen?
Yes, yes, I can see the slide. Yes.
And now also, can you see the same slide only? No?
Uh,
Or it changed?
No, now it's different risk definition, assets, vulnerability, threat. Okay. Mm.
Yeah. So
This
it
is,
is.
yeah. Mhm. Now the screen has gone.
Can you see the
Yes.
screen now?
Yes, yes, yes. Hmm.
It is the risk definition
Yes, yes, yes.
now.
Yes, yes, yes. Now I can see asset, vulnerability, threat. Yes.
Yeah. So
Hmm.
yeah. So there was some technical issue yesterday when I was taking another class. That is why I was
Okay.
checking. So right now you are
No, no,
seeing the
no, it's
same
fine.
slide, right?
Yeah, I'm seeing the same slides, slide number 100, which has risk definitions. Hmm.
Great, great, great. So
Yeah.
now, as per the understanding of threat, some
Hmm.
examples of threat is phishing, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Ransomware.
Hmm.
Any of these you don't understand broadly, then you can tell me. I will explain. Malware,
Oh, I understand. Understand. I understand.
social engineering,
Yes.
insider threats.
Hmm.
What is APTs?
APTs.
Advanced
Mm,
persistent threats.
no, that I don't understand.
So it's a very important kind of threat. It is a
Mm.
prolonged and targeted cyber attack in which an intruder gains access to a network and maintains undetected and remains
For a longer time. Yes,
for
and
an
they change the
so
settings and all. Hmm.
yeah, he's sitting into a system or he's sitting into the network, and for a prolonged time, he is able to do something known as espionage, and this between mostly between two nation states and into that hi-fi movies which we see. So on a
Mm-hmm.
world, probably not so relevant. However, this is also one of the major threat to any information security setup, right? Then
Mm-hmm.
DOS and DDoS attacks,
Yeah, yeah, distributed.
zero,
Yeah, that I understand. Yes,
zero days.
when they overload the system, right?
Yeah, the server is
Distributed.
flooded with
Mm-hmm.
so many requests that it is not able to handle and it crashes.
Mm-hmm.
So when you block a particular IP, then that is one of the ways to stop a DOS attack. So what new ways they have evolved is they do a distributed denial of service attack. So from the multiple sources now the request comes. So you are unable to drop the packets, and what is legitimate and what is illegitimate you are not able to make out. There's so many different sources the request is coming that the server crashes with excessive traffic. That is
Mm-hmm.
the and there are 0 day exploits.
Yes, yes. Meaning the vulnerability which exists on 0 day, hackers exploit that.
Yeah, the attacks that occur on the undiscovered vulnerability. There is a freshly developed exploit, so there is no prevention against that exploit. means signature based, like your antivirus and all works on signature based and only based. So there is no signature of that particular exploit existing. So all the technical controls which we have put, they will not be able to detect the exploit itself, and the exploit will easily get access to the system. So it is 0 day. It has never been discovered earlier. Man in the middle.
Man in the middle means when someone is getting into the network and try to gain the access.
Yeah, so hacker is sitting
Mm.
between the two client and a server, and he is able to
Yeah.
listen to both the communications, and both of the server as well as the client is not even aware that there is somebody sitting in middle, and the person who is
Mhm.
sitting in middle can manipulate the information both the ways, or he may even just be a listener and utilize it subsequent to the man in the middle.
Mhm. Mhm.
Then credential
Uh,
surf, breach of username,
that-
password pairs to gain
uh,
access to. Then
uh,
SQL inject.
SQL inject is on the websites and all when they
Yeah,
inject the yeah, and exploit it.
cross-site scripting.
Uh, that is always I forget about it. I always read about it but forget about it.
It's
But
a
if you have
injection.
some simple way to explain, then explain me
Yeah,
that.
we will be covering it in the third domain in detail, but
Okay.
I'm just covering these terms because they are the when we say threat. So these are the things which should come in our mind, right?
Okay.
Because it is too mundane and it is more of literature oriented. So because they expect you to have some domain expertise, so that is why they keep
Mhm.
it like that. And when day to day these things we come across, but yes, remembering is not this thing. So when we say a threat, these are the terms which should just flash in our mind. So these are the threats:
Mhm.
cross-site scripting, drive-by downloads, IoT attacks, supply chain attacks, crypto jacking, data breach. We will be
Mhm.
covering them in detail. So I'm just reading out the terms. So general familiarity with the types of cyber attacks the threats we generally come across: home jacking, botnets, bombs, fileless malware, rogue software, brute force attacks, business email compromise, deep fakes. Right, the latest ones, the deep fakes. So these are the kind of.
Yes, yes.
Now let's talk about vulnerabilities. Some examples of
Mm.
vulnerabilities.
There's no example on top of my head, but these are related to the CVVs that are being published. But I don't have any example on top of my head for the vulnerability. The password is weak. That is also one of the vulnerability. That
Absolutely.
the password set up anywhere like in the network infra or application, the password is you are not required to set up a strong password, meaning
Right.
that is a design failure. So that will become your vulnerability.
So it's an inherent weakness in the system. And when
Yes.
we talk of vulnerabilities, some examples are outdated software.
Open source software also that are
Yeah.
being the built on open source softwares. Yes.
Now, again, this is a very good point which you have come across. Is the open source more safe or closed source more safe? There have been a debate between the professionals on this account, and yeah,
If you're again, I mean, I'll go back to what you said yesterday. It has to be on the basis of risk assessment and the requirement. But if you're using open source and then building upon it and doing all the checks, security checks and everything, so then it is easier to use and you are customizing open source as per your need. But the closed source would be the way you want to customize it, but it could come with more cost, and it also depends on what is the end use of it. How do you want to use? So if it
yeah.
is not that critical and all, yeah.
So now the thing is that a closed source or a proprietary software is driven by a particular company like Microsoft, and the Microsoft would ensure and take responsibility of it remains secure, and it is issuing patches to the discovered vulnerabilities. That is one definitely a more you can have more trust on from that perspective on the closed source product or a proprietary product. But the problem with the proprietary product is the cost, firstly, which you rightly brought out. Second is that there can be illusion that it is secure, because most of the 0 days which found, they don't come out or they come out at a very late stage. So there could be a false sense of security when we talk of proprietary, just because it is proprietary and we have paid cost for it, and the provider, service provider, is ensuring and taking responsibility of its being safe. At times it could be not the right way. A well established open source architecture like Linux would be more safe, because it has existed for such a long time, and since it's an open source, then all type of hackers have tried to exploit it, and they have not been able to do it. So this, it's a tried and tested safety, as far as when we talk of the fact that it is reachable to each and every hacker, and still it is existing in this environment. So that means it is safe. Whereas that is not the case with the proprietary software, because the proprietary software source code access is not available to those. They have to really work hard to get that. Are you getting what I'm trying to say?
Sorry, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Sorry,
I
I
can.
was speaking
Can
on
you?
mute.
No,
Yeah.
no, no. Can you
Okay,
see the
okay.
slide?
Yes, yes, I can see this one. So we were talking about open source and proprietary one, and you were mentioning that it is like security is like something that is being created around it, that it is more secure. However, it is not always the same case.
Yeah, it is not always the same case, because in a case of a proprietary software, the
Mm.
chances of 0 days is quite high. So
Yes.
basically, an insider who knows the proprietary setup inside and out, he
Mm.
knows the architecture and how, on the basis how it is working. That for that
Mm.
person, it probably would be easier to crack it. The reason being that it is not, there is a false sense of security sometimes attached to that.
Mm.
And
Mm.
similarly, in a open source system which is well established, I'm not saying something which is just launched or just come out in use, but something which is well established. That
Mm.
open source system has a more safety embedded into it, because it has been tried and tested, and it is available to the entire world. So all the hackers have already tried their luck, and they have not been able to bring it down. So that is how it should be sometimes seen. So we were on the examples of vulnerabilities. So there are outdated softwares. There's unpatched vulnerabilities existing inside the enterprise. There are weak passwords, which you brought out correctly, right? There is an example of unsecured APIs. Now APIs are again generally left to for God to save, because the front end and the end user is generally focused, and APIs which are actually very critical, people generally don't give it that much attention they deserve, right? Then misconfigured cloud services,
Mm.
then phishing vulnerabilities, right?
Mm.
Then
Mm.
the vulnerabilities go like insufficient network segmentation, unencrypted
Mm.
data, insufficient access control, lack of
Mm.
multi-factor authentication. So these are the certain examples which I'm just blabbering, and we will be discussing them in detail in the next segment. But again, when
Mm.
we talk of vulnerabilities, these kind of terms should come in your mind, and be able to relate that, okay, these are the vulnerabilities we are going to deal with. Default credentials, as you rightly said, people are using
Mm.
default credentials for most of the, even for the firewall and all access control, they are putting default credentials. They have not changed the credentials only, because for whatever reason, and that is a big vulnerability. Unsecured physical access,
Mm.
vulnerable web application, poor endpoint security, weak cryptography, insecure logging and monitoring, an outdated and unsupported operating system, insecure
Mm.
third-party components, third-party supply chain vulnerabilities,
Mm.
insecure wireless networks. Wireless, again, a big weak area. Lack of incident response plan, never tested, right? That is a vulnerability. Then improper error handling, insecure communication channel, insufficient backup and recovery procedure. So these are certain examples which I was just bringing out when we see a term vulnerability in front of
Mm.
us, right? Now,
Right.
is a difference between, this is important to understand, right? What is the
Mm.
difference between risk and threat?
So, threat is like you have explained all these things, like phishing can happen and all that. That is a threat. But risk is data lose would be, I
So
mean,
when you when,
leakage
if
of
you
the data.
if you Google,
Mm.
sorry to interrupt you, I'm really sorry.
Mm.
If you
Mm.
Google, when you say risk, then phishing attack is in the category of risk also, and phishing attacks is in the category of threat also. And malware, if you see, again in the category, or in the both the categories, you'll find the denial of service and distributed denial of service. You will see in both the categories, people are using is that a threat also, as well as a risk also.
Actually, you're right because for some reason, I mean, for some official reason, I was reading the threat modeling framework, and this is same as risk
Yes.
framework,
Yes.
identification and then action plan, then all these things. I mean, mitigation and all that. It is same. I mean, all the stages and everything were same.
So exactly why I posed this question, because I also, when I was on the field and doing certain analysis work, I
Mm,
realized that both the contents of both remains the same, whether we call it as a risk or we call it as a threat.
mm,
So what is the difference? Because there is a difference. There is definitely a difference. However,
mm.
why is it so that when we see the examples, they are same, and it is really
Okay.
important to understand that as that the concept at conceptual level we should be very clear with the difference between threat and a risk,
So maybe
because
I'm
the
not
entire
that
domain.
clear about these two because I
No, it
have
is not.
seen people. Mhm.
It's just that we have not applied ourselves say,
Yes.
thinking like that. So that's okay. But now that
Mm,
we are doing the certification and we have to think about it. So what do you think from your point of view with the whatever on field experience? What could be, because they are same. When we say they are the same in the sense that the content like distributed denial of attack, you say IoT vulnerability, cloud risk, man in the middle, 0-day exploit, the examples are exactly the same in both. So, what could be the fundamental difference between the two? If you can just take an attempt on that.
Can I take some example which is
Yeah, yeah,
beyond
yeah, yeah.
cybersecurity? So,
Sure, sure.
like for example, if we are on the road, then the threat would be that some person could come and hit us, or car can get some kind of malfunction or something. I mean, get into an accident or some worse scenario. That is a threat that we are having, and the risk is of losing life or risk of
This is the same.
yeah. So I mean, that is how I can see the risks are many.
Again,
Like
again, you
we can
see,
get.
here is there is a dichotomy in the sense that if we say my getting hit on the road is also a risk only, it is a risk when I move out or outside, that is a risk I'm taking that somebody can come and hit me. So, what is the difference
Yes.
then in the threat and risk?
The risk could be more result. I mean, the end objective. Like if someone can hit you, that could be a threat. But the risk would be that if someone is hitting me, then I may end up in the hospital or may lose my life or some such. I mean, I'm just thinking that risk is a little beyond than threat.
Now you are talking a little. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah,
that's
you're right.
how I can see it.
Yeah.
Mm,
Now you're coming to the point what I'm trying to. So when we differentiate, if we go just read up the definition again, a threat is a
mm,
potential danger that can exploit a vulnerability to breach security and cause harm to an asset or organization. Right? It is a potential danger. A threat actor would be the driver who does not know how to drive, or he is
mm,
not focused on the road. So that is a threat actor who is going to bang us when we are on road. Right? The driver,
mm,
the other side driver. He is the
mm,
threater. He is the person who is cause of which we should be careful, right?
mm,
But what a definition of risk is the potential of loss, damage, and destruction. Now we are seeing that when we are now calculating the percentage, like if I'm traveling from A city to B city, and somewhere
mm,
we have data wherein we can calculate that out of 100 commuters, what could be how many times they get that this kind of a scenario, and we analyze it further, and then we say, okay, 1% chance or 0.1% chance exists, right? So now
the
the potential,
probability.
yes. So the
Mm,
potential is like zero point 0.1. So the potential of loss, damage, destruction to an asset as a result of threat exploiting and vulnerability. So if I take out the vulnerability, that is, I am not traveling only,
mm,
then this accident will not happen. Or if I take out
mm,
the threat only, that means I ensure that there is a policeman at every nook and corner, or probably there is a divider which is existing, or some controls exist. So the threat is kept at the bay. So the threat actor is kept at the bay. So again,
mm,
the risk has come down. So the components of risk, if they are treated properly, mitigated properly, firstly understood properly and mitigated properly, then we are reducing the risk to a considerable level. The threat is, if we go by further key differences, it is focus. If we talk of focus, a threat is focused on the entity or the event that can cause harm, right?
okay.
Risk is focused on the potential outcome, which you rightly said,
Mm,
and the
mm,
ability and impact. So the end result after it happens, means what will, we are always proactive, right? We are preempting. So after a threat is realized, a risk is realized, a threat actor acts on the vulnerability. What all will be the outcome and what will be the impact? That particular focus is the focus or area of the risk. Whereas a threat is on the entity or the event. It is a event specific. When we talk of the components, it is in threat is involves the source of danger, whereas a risk involves threat, vulnerability, and potential impact of the incident. When we talk from the management perspective, we manage threat by identifying and neutralizing or mitigating specific threats, event or specific threats, right? Like in using an antivirus software to protect against a malware. So there are specific things we are trying to mitigate a threat. Whereas when we talk of a risk, we manage by assessing the likelihood and impact, then implement controls to mitigate or accept the risk. So in case of risk, we have multiple ways how we are going to deal with the risk, which we'll be covering subsequently. We can even accept a risk if we find that it is not worth mitigating it. So that is a strengthening, for example, strengthening password policy, encrypting to reduce the risk of breach of data. So these kind of some of the examples between or the scenarios in which how we can be differentiate between risk and the threat. So I hope that now the both the terms are absolutely clear, right?
Yes, yes.
So yes,
Now the both terms are clear. Yeah.
yeah. So that is why this one slide, which could be not even one third of covering the space of this particular slide, but it is extremely important when we talk on conceptually. So from conceptual point of view, if you are understanding these differences, actually you are actually understanding the entire domain, because rest all is revolving around these key differences, right? Now again, as I said, the threat has a threat agent who will be carrying out that particular, and the event or the exploit will be the instance of compromise. At that particular event, that instance of compromise is a exploit, right? The risk is a combination of the probability of the event and its consequences. So it covers a broader, it is covered in a broader way. It is a probability, we are preempting, we are consequence focused, and we want to prevent that consequence to happen. For that, we will be working out our controls, and we will be trying to prevent that consequence which comes out after the threat actor acts on the vulnerability and results in some consequence. Risks are often seen as an adverse event that can threaten an organization's assets, exploit vulnerabilities, and cause harm. So ISO 331,000 defines risk as the effect of an uncertainty on objectives. We don't know what all can hit us, but yes, we can preempt. So there's an uncertainty. So there is a risk. There is a dar. We say risk in Hindi. You say dar hai, dar hai. There is a problem. There is a dar. So indicating risk can at times be positive. The impact of risk can even be positive, or it could be negative. We don't know. It could some things can go in favor. When the India is 6 wickets down, and we say, oh my God, Dhoni is there, and it looks very risky. It looks like we cannot win, and the probabilities are all against us. But finally, the outcome comes out to be positive also, because their luck was with us. So we are talking of probabilities when we are talking of risk. And ISO 27005 says that it should be considered as negative, because finally positive is a positive side. So let's focus on the negative aspect and mitigate the negatives, right? So that is the now coming to another aspect. Now when talking of risk, there are multiple types of risk which exist in the environment. So can you explain the inherent risk? What is the inherent risk?
The risk which is there in the system, and that cannot be, I mean, without any mitigation or anything, we know that that risk would remain in the system or in the process or somewhere. So that is inherent risk, the risk that is inherited.
Absolutely. So this is a kind of question which definitely is going to come, right? So it is a risk without controls. It is a risk which has been inherited that exists, and there is no control. Without control, whatever the risk is there, that is inherent. It is a natural level risk inherited in a process or activity before any step has been taken to reduce it. Example is in an e-commerce company handling online credit card transaction. Inherent risk would be a credit card fraud or a data breach due to the processing and storing of sensitive payment information. So this is an inherent risk in when a credit card company is running a credit card show. So so the potential threats in that scenario will be hackers, malware, insider threat, like right, and the vulnerability is the weakness of security measures and human error. So when we see the entire scenario of this inherent risk, there is a threat of hacker, malware, insider. There is a vulnerability, weakness, and human error, weakness in. So that is how without control. Now we have not put any control, but when we
mm,
put control, we can use some technical controls like encryption, firewall, some administrative controls like policies, regular audits and assessments, some physical controls like secure data centers. So these are the things which we can do to this inherent risk to make it more secure, which is called as risk treatment, which we will be covering separately. But I think the inherent risk is the concept is absolutely clear. Now, what is
mm.
a secondary risk?
Secondary risk, basically, what happens is when you have got into one event, after that, there is a follow-up event that is happening, and there is another risk that is coming out of it. Or there could be like an incident or something. So basically, like for example, data leakage has happened, and due to which now the reputation is on the stake, the compliance is also there. So there are multiple risks which are associated. So that's how the secondary risk can be defined.
So, for example, again, if you mitigate the primary risk, and after in
Mm,
the process of mitigation, if there is an
mm.
additional risk now which has creeped in, then we
Yeah,
say that
right.
because of the risk treatment of the primary risk has resulted in some
Mm,
secondary risk which needs to be further mitigated, right? So, for example,
mm,
now your company is there and it decides to move to cloud,
mm, mm,
because they inside the on-premises servers are considered to be risky. They decide to move to cloud. So
mm,
the secondary risk arises the risk of data transfer. Now you are
mm,
cloud service dependency. You are too much dependent on the cloud service provider or now access
mm,
control risk because the data is now in on his premises, not on your premises. And regulatory compliance risk because the cloud service provider will provide services, but finally the ultimate responsibility is yours. So if there is any regulatory issue, then you will be the person who will be responsible, even if the CSP is having our data. So mitigate all this
mm,
secondary risk. You can take certain steps like encryption, secure channel, then
mm,
to prevent the dependency on the CSP. You can have due diligence, service level agreements to ensure
mm,
the act control is perfect. You can have some access management or regular audits to prevent
mm,
regulatory compliance risk. You can have compliance checks and data residency management kind of thing. So they are the primary and the secondary. The secondary risk is the risk response may cause from the secondary risk event from when we are trying to mitigate the primary risk. And residual
mm,
risk is once you have treated the inherent risk, the balance of the
mm,
risk which is remaining after the
mm.
treatment is
Is
the
resident.
residual, and it should always lie between the risk
Mm.
tolerance bracket that we will be covering subsequently. What is risk tolerance? So now,
So, as per my understanding, Manish, and please correct me if I'm wrong, these risk appetite, tolerance, threshold, and everything, these all rules applies to residual risk, right? Not to inherent risk, right?
no, no. Let me
Okay.
cover the terms. Then you will have then
Mm.
you will have a more clarity. So keep this question with you, and we will take it on after say few terms I have covered again.
Okay, okay. Mm.
So now coming to risk appetite. So
Mm.
whenever I see this term appetite, I feel hungry because appetite is person's capacity to eat, right? Some
Yes.
how much he can consume.
Mm.
So
Mm.
appetite again is risk appetite is a level and a type of risk an organization is willing to pursue or retain
Personal.
in order to
Mm.
achieve this objective,
Yes.
right?
Mm.
A tolerance level is what I can tolerate. So there are some kids when we are sitting at home and kids are troubling us. So there is a level to which level when it comes when I say that okay, enough is enough, right? So till that time we
Mm.
are tolerating them. So there is a
Mm.
level to which we can tolerate. It is an acceptable kind of a risk. So tolerance is a specific degree of risk that an organization or a stakeholder is willing to endure
Mm.
within a
Mm.
certain period or a particular initiative. So it becomes a event specific or a period specific tolerance. So say
Mm.
when we again go back to the same example, in the morning time we are fresh, so we have higher tolerance to nonsense. But the evening
Mm.
time after the day's work, the tolerance level comes down. So tolerance is an event specific. It may vary based on the environment, and it is not a broader term. Whereas appetite, if you see, when the capacity to eat food, it generally remains a broader term you generally have the same appetite throughout your life cycle, or I would say a particular age. So that particular, it's a broader term what you can your appetite is, and what your tolerance is based on a specific or shorter period of time. And a threshold is the maximum of nonsense what you can take. After that, there will be a break. So risk threshold is a specific point at which the risk becomes unacceptable. So when
So,
you're
as per
talking,
my
yeah,
organization, and maybe something that you can also correct, risk appetite is also based on the threshold, right? We say that we can, as per my appetite, I can take two cyber attack of so and so loss in a year.
yeah.
So that would be risk appetite, or that would be like a risk threshold.
Yeah, I'm coming to that. I'm just coming to that
Mm.
point. So,
Okay.
yeah, so threshold is when everything becomes unacceptable. So, I will be
Mm.
answering both the questions in next 2 minutes. And it
Okay.
depends the risk limit of risk exposed at when reached.
For full course video training, visit MildainTrainings.com. Register now.
Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel.